Welcome to De-Stress Your Business, the podcast where we show you how to get incredible results in your business without constant stress. I'm Alexis Kingsbury, a serial entrepreneur and founder at AirManual, and I'm joined by my co-founder and my co-host, Paddy Mann. Morning, Paddy.
Good morning.
Hi there. So in recent episodes, we've been talking about how to recruit A players into your organisation. And on a few occasions, we've mentioned how you can use your company's core values to help with this process. Reviewing a candidate against your core values can be a really effective way of answering the question, how well would this person fit into my organisation? But in many organisations, core values aren't well defined or aren't really being used. So in today's episode, we're going to take a deeper look at core values and how they can help to de-stress your business. Tomorrow, we'll then look at how to define core values if you don't have any, or if you feel like the ones that you do have are not really being used. So let's start off, Paddy, with what are core values? What do we mean by that?
Cool. So when we talk about core values, what I'm thinking about is the behaviors that I want people in my organization to display. I guess behaviors is a bit of an HRE term. It's a term you get familiar with when you're defining your core values, but it's kind of like, how do you expect other people to act when they are faced with a decision? Will they favor being fast or focusing on quality? It's those little nuances where you go, there are some things in our organization where we would want ourselves and our team to act in a certain way. And by having this kind of defined as a set of core values, you've got something which you can all refer back to and use as a kind of a guiding principle for the team to say, this is something that we believe in, this is the way that we act. And it's not that you're picking up on something that you'd expect everyone professionally to do. So you could have a core value which says we are ethical and we, don't do anything illegal, but you'd expect every company really to be doing that, at least in the West. There are maybe other countries where it's a really valuable core value, but if you expect that to be a kind of a ground rule, the core values are the things that kind of help you define where you are slightly different or where there are essentially places where it might not be intuitive for everyone to go in a certain direction, and you say, but for our organization, for our people, this is the way that we want to go.
Yeah, and I think if you take that example of following the law or ethics or whatever, I think it's probably less about location and country and so on, and more about industry in my experience. Like, I think that there are certain industries where it's a weird thing to say, oh yeah, we're ethical and follow the law, because it's so common that that's the standard, right? And I think what you essentially lead to is like, it's got to be different to what, it's got to be significant in that space. Like, there's no point in saying that, let's say that you make windows for people's properties. One of your core values, it would be pointless to say we make windows, or we make sure that windows aren't broken. Like, that is the bare minimum standard for anyone in that industry. Whereas you might say that in that industry, there's been a tradition of hard selling and being pushy and so on, and perhaps the core value for that particular company, different to others, is actually that our value is that we don't apply pressure, and we're more consultative or whatever. Like, and it's relevant depending on the area. In the same way that there are certain industries or whatever, or individual markets, and you kind of mentioned sort of geographies there, west, east, etc. I think actually doesn't matter as much, but there are certainly individual countries and industries within countries where that is more the norm. So we've had the fortune of, as consultants, working with lots of different organisations around the world, where in some cases we've seen pockets where like bribery is just a standard practice of business. And so people within that area, I mean, we hold a very high set of ethics and legal expectation within our companies, more so than most. But at the same time, like we've had to deal with in the past, a defence that's put forward by leaders of, oh no, this is just standard practice. And so I think that's the key, right? When we're talking about core values, it's what is different versus the standard practice, rather than just listing off 10 things that you'd expect anyone to do in any job anywhere, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and probably you sort of kind of illustrate it with a few examples. As we talk about the ethical one, the one that kind of jumps into my head is Uber. Now, I don't know what their core values were written down as, but most certainly there was a core value being displayed and the higher reaches of their organization, which was basically grow at all costs. And
Yeah.
being ethical did not need to be part of it, and that was instrumental in the decisions they made, the way that they hired, the way that they approached new markets. As I say, I don't know what they had defined, and sometimes you kind of have these behaviors which are more kind of built in. But that was certainly a case where you did have an organization who was going in an unethical way. And if they wanted to then address that and to say, this is no longer what we do, then setting the core value to say, in future, we always do the ethical thing would actually be valuable because you're making a significant cultural shift from the kind of the status quo in that organization.
Right, and
Yep.
and of course, there we're talking about ethics as a core value, but typically that's not a good value to use within most organisations, right? Because as you say, it's a bit the standard. And it's interesting that without having defined core values, often or at least having them written down, they still exist within the organisation. And I know that one of the most common values that we see in organisations that don't define them and don't work on them and so on is a value around like staying late and being the last one to leave, and you end up with all those things. We'll talk about some of the examples of the stress that not having values or having poorly defined values, etc., can cause. But give us some examples of great core values and how they've been used in organisations to bring a positive benefit.
Cool. So I'll pick a couple of big organizations. We've got one I particularly like is Amazon, and they've got somewhere between 5 and 9 core values. It's normal to pick around 5, and some companies only have 3, some make a longer list. I think Amazon at the moment maybe have 9, but 2 of them that kind of jump out are customer obsession and hire the best. I'll say particularly the customer obsession. It's that one which you can really see resonate in how they've approached the market and every business that they go into. They are really laser focused on how do we make the experience for the customer really great. And it's not just going onto the website, it's essential that the thing that you order arrives really promptly. And so they focused on how could we actually get to the point where you receive it in 2 days or 1 day? How could we get to the point where we're over delivering so you get the surprise of it arriving later that afternoon when you were expecting it tomorrow, and the impact it had. And for those of us that are big fans of Amazon, or at least used to be, it was that kind of thing which made a huge difference. Now, in a lot of organizations, if you want to make that happen, then it has to come from the leadership, and the leadership has to kind of almost get involved in all these projects. But by defining it as a core value, as a guiding principle, it means that Jeff Bezos doesn't need to be in every meeting room. He has equipped the team with basically a decision-making principle, which is this going to be a great experience for customers? Is there anything we can do to make this a better experience for customers? And it doesn't matter that it might take longer. It doesn't matter that it might be a little bit more expensive. They've defined it. That's our core value. It's customer obsession. So I really like that one from Amazon.
Yeah, and a nice example I seem to remember of hearing how that's used is that within their meetings they would, and I don't know whether it's all meetings, but certainly many of their meetings, they would set up an empty chair that would represent the voice of the customer, so that they that they can point to and refer to and imagine, like, actually imagine that all of our meetings have got the customer at it. How would they rate what we're saying? If we're having a conversation, like, would they be speaking up going, that sounds like it's going to be worse for me or more expensive or whatever it is? And I think that's just one tactical example of how you take a core value and actually implement it in the business, right? Because there's no point in just having a set of core values that are on a PowerPoint slide or on a poster on the wall. You have to then work out how you're going to implement this in everything that you do, and every process, every way of working, your communication channels, your recruitment, your onboarding, your performance management processes. How do you put those in? And I think that's a nice example. Like, perhaps give us another example on like how then it works out and how it could be used.
Cool. And so I'll pick another famous example, which is Meta, as they've now been rebranded. Used to be Facebook, and there's a kind of before and after story here. So the original kind of value, which is well known, is to move fast and break things. And so this was Mark Zuckerberg essentially going, we need to be first to get out there and become the biggest. And it's better to get a product out there which is buggy but can deliver some value rather than to wait and potentially be beaten by the competition and not be learning about the wider value that this can have for the customer. So they built that in. It was a huge, a Facebook focus, and it's one of the things that helped them to grow to be one of the biggest companies on the planet. Now, more recently, that's changed. Can't remember exactly when. It's before they got renamed to Meta, but they changed that direction and said, actually, now our values are to move fast and to focus on long-term impact. And the reason that they needed to change is essentially they started to get this kind of conflict of going, actually, it doesn't work anymore for us to be releasing products which are not quite to the standard. There's such a huge volume of customers, existing customers that are going onto the tool that have certain expectations and would lead to certain levels of support that taking that same approach doesn't work for us. And so they've adapted it, and they've got the new ones, which is they'll still want their teams to move fast, but they want to focus on the long-term impact. And it's a really clever one because it's not kind of just kind of thinking arbitrarily, okay, this is the new direction, but it's basically setting a new path for their existing employees. And then, they've got tens, hundreds of thousands, millions of employees. I'm not sure. But up to this point, all of those employees have had it drilled into them that they need to move fast and break things. And so by setting this new value, they're setting this really clear new path where they need to focus on making sure that it actually works in the long term too. And that's where just these kind of the 3, 5, 7 core values can make a real impact as to clearly communicate the direction and the way that you want people to be making decisions at all levels of your business.
Yeah, and I really like that as an example of how it may change over time, although the time periods we're talking about are typically long. If you're changing some of these core values on a really regular basis, then you haven't got them quite right. I think would kind of be the situation, because frankly, you should be recruiting based on these values and so on. And what you don't want to be is recruiting people in January based on one set of core values, fundamentally changing those values in June, and then again in December and so on. And as a result, you're not able to recruit and manage that. Whereas, as you say, like a fundamental pivot in their approach was necessary. It'd be interesting to explore whether a better defined value up front would have avoided that, and whether or not actually move fast and deliver long-term impact would have worked from the beginning rather than move fast and break things. It's interesting. I think about Facebook in particular, and I don't remember it as being particularly buggy in the very early days, but definitely remember it buggy in more recent memory. And so I wonder whether it was less of a problem then and became more of an issue later, right? But yeah, that's interesting. And so those are some great examples of large companies using it as part of theirs. Again, in terms of like, how are they then used day to day and so on, and perhaps either bring another example, or let's talk about how some of those core values, how do they actually end up used?
Yeah, so I think if we look at our own core values, so we've got 5 core values, and they are focus on impact. So we're expecting our employees always to be thinking about the impact, and we're talking about the impact for our customers, but also the impact it will have for the team and the individuals and the business, not just focusing on output or quality or other internal metrics, which certain teams can get hung on. So we're all about focusing on the impact as a team. We've got being proactive and dependable, got paying attention to detail. So our quality standards in everything we do are pretty high, and that's something that helps differentiate us in the market. We've got always looking to improve, so we're looking for people that are really focused on their personal development and bringing those lessons to the team. And we've got enjoying the journey, which is a huge one, because it is saying that we are here for the long haul. It doesn't work to be constantly chasing deadlines, working late, not having a holiday. And so, myself and Alexis were both parents of young families, and we put a high premium on the quality of life and time that we get outside of work, and and at making sure that, as we look to build our businesses, that we are enjoying it and not just looking for a happy retirement. And so we're trying to reflect that value we have with our team, so they get the same enjoyment and prioritize it, and know that actually we will have their back when they do things like finishing on time and taking holiday, which we will actively encourage rather than suggest otherwise. I hear from other companies, people worried about taking maternity or paternity leave, and we go very heavily the opposite direction and give a very generous and equal amount of time off for both sets of parents, because it's just built in, and it gets, the way it's then used is it's built into our recruitment process. So it's built into what we look for in the people that we hire, the people that also share these values and will value what we're giving them, and we will value what they give to the company. We use it in decision making, and like for enjoying the value, as I say, it affects our decisions on whether or not we expect people to work late or the weekends. And one thing that we learned is it's not, enjoying the journey doesn't mean clocking off at exactly
No.
5 o'clock every day. Sometimes you enjoy working a little later, getting something over the line, and it's about understanding that. We build it into the way that we do meetups and the way that we, frankly, do everything. We also build all of our values into the way that we review our employee performance. And so once every quarter, we do a performance review, and we're essentially reviewing against these five things as a key part of that review. And so we're looking at, have you been focused on impact? Have you been proactive and dependable? Have you been paying attention to detail? Are you always looking to improve? Have you been enjoying the journey? And if generally we're looking at people are excelling in 3 or more of those areas, and at least okay in 2 of them. And if we get into a position where someone is essentially underperforming, if someone is going against one of our values, we will start managing that immediately. We will highlight that that's an area that's got to improve. And if it comes up more than once, then we're going to start to talk about the process for a performance improvement plan, essentially, which you can look at as 2 ways. The first time we did it, we actually imagined this was going to be managing someone out, but actually we've had repeated examples where people have then understood just how important these are, and they have learned from doing the performance improvement plan and adapted. But it's a huge game changer for an organization versus many small businesses that don't have it, because they get stuck in a position where they have employees who they're not underperforming so much at their core job that you feel you can remove them, but they are conflicting with you and constantly grinding against you and the team, and it causes a lot of pain. And you can see that as when you look at the team level, that everything isn't working as well because of these core individuals. When you've got your core values defined in this way, it suddenly becomes really easy to go, it's because you're not always looking to improve, and that's something that is important to our company, and therefore I can manage on it, and I will put you on a performance improvement plan and see if we can deal with it. It's incredible.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good summary. I think it's we'll cover in separate episodes. 1, how to create the values, and 2, how to do performance management really effectively, and including managing and satisfactory performance, because I think we've got some fantastic processes, but a great lessons learned there. But I think in terms of as you say, like how they're used and how they're implemented and everything we do, I think it's worth highlighting, without getting too deep into how you create the value, but it's worth highlighting, like, when we define the value, yes, it's setting out the behaviors that we're expecting, but it's based on fundamental beliefs. It's in the same way as, I think, as you mentioned that one of our core values is paying attention to detail. The belief at the core of that is that we will move faster and enjoy the journey more when we do things right and don't introduce bugs and mistakes and so on. Whereas if we said, oh yeah, we move fast and break things, we might move, we believe we'd move faster in the short term, but potentially slower in the long term, because we'd then spend so much time having to fix things later on. And I think that's an interesting challenge, because I think some might look at our business and say, because of some of our core values, including enjoy the journey and paying attention to detail, you could argue that we'll move slower than other businesses. But our belief at the core is that actually long term we move faster, because we don't burn people out. People are happy. We attract awesome talent. We believe that when your mental energy is at its highest, you're able to work smarter, not harder and longer. And as a result, you deliver great things. And when you pay attention to detail, you don't introduce bugs and issues that cause these problems later on. And I think it's important to understand, it's like you have some beliefs that and then behaviors that you see, the behaviors of the visual or the obvious demonstration of those beliefs. And I think, as you say, using it as part of our recruitment, using it as part of our performance management, but also in pretty much every process we have some way in which those things are exhibited, and our policies as well. Like you mentioned, how our leave policies around how much holiday we give, because in fact we haven't mentioned that. Like we give 40 days holiday, but crucially we make sure people take it, right? Like, because we're all about enjoy the journey, and that's one example of how our core value is actually demonstrated day to day. We know at various points when we've made these sorts of decisions, we've looked at other businesses, particularly in the last few years, that have said, oh, we give unlimited holiday as an attractive thing to go to them. But we know from speaking to people in those companies and so on, that they don't make people take it. And so the reality is, when you give unlimited, you don't track how much people take. And as a result, you often don't get the desired result, which is, you want people to take a decent amount. Whereas, we make sure that people take it, because we believe, our fundamental belief there is that it results in happier, healthier, smarter, more switched on employees that deliver great stuff, and it's just a better thing for us, and so on. So I think, we've talked about some examples of, what great examples of core values look like, and how you can use them. If values aren't clear within an organization, what stresses would we see? What would be the impact of not having clear values? We mentioned before, like, values exist in your company, whether or not you've defined them, but what's the problem if you haven't got them set out?
Yeah, so we could probably kind of blow up, what would happen on that enjoying the journey one if myself and Alexis had contrasting views. So Alexis believes heavily in the need to enjoy the journey, and that it's fundamentally better. And it's not just better because it will lead to us being more successful as a business, but the guiding, what he wants to get out of the next 10 years isn't entirely about making money. It's about giving himself an enjoyable place to work. It's about the people that he hires having a great life and giving back to the world in that way, as well as the output. What if at the same time my value was unicorn or bust? I wanted to make sure we get to $5 billion and sell for a huge amount. I want to
if you felt like the ends justifies the means, like if your value was like, kind of doesn't matter how you get there, the important thing is you get there, and as a result, if some people burn out along the way, that's kind of normal, or indeed it's like that's down to them, and really it's about one day we want to be in this amazing position. Like, if that was what you fundamentally believe, right?
Exactly, and you don't have to look far to find a lot of organizations that have this value. Basically, every organization that takes on funding almost gets pushed into this position. But what would happen if we were doing that? Well, one, obviously, me and Alexis are not going to have many happy meetings, because I'm going to be working every weekend, I'm going to be working every night, and he's not. Yeah. Then you're going to look down the chart, and you're going to find that his team are being encouraged to also reflect Alexis's values, whereas my teams are being told to reflect mine. So you've got the two parts of the organization working in completely different ways. And you can imagine the conflict between those two teams. Like the engineers going like, what the hell is happening? Like, we're busting a gut and the sales team are pissing off home at 5 o'clock on a Friday. What are they thinking? And so you get this huge conflict at every level. And more than that, given the nature of how we operate, I'm going to be talking to the people in sales, and Alex is going to be talking to the people in engineering. They're going to get these conflicting messages. They're not going to know which way to turn. And when they're making their own decisions, there's no guiding principle. So it could be one, the other, or anywhere in between. And you're just going to have this huge mess. You're going to have this huge amount of frustration between individuals. You're not going to be optimized for either. And in some ways, based on my beliefs, there's a right answer about how you should do it, but there are obviously very successful businesses operating in the other way, and that's fine if everyone's working in that way and understands what they're getting into. But it doesn't work if you have this mix and it's not clear. That's where you get employees kind of getting home because they're really, really stressed because their values around getting time with their family is not being reflected in the company. But it's not made clear to them when they're being hired or during a lot of their meetings that that's just the way that the company is going to be forever, and that they could find a different company with better values for them if they are not in that alignment.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think, as you say, when you illustrate it with an example of two different teams that are living different values and how that conflicts, I think that draws a start example. I think another example that I've seen within our organisation is where a newer member of staff, typically, who particularly based on previous experience, often based on working with a previous employer, exhibits behaviours that previously they would have been rewarded for or that would have been encouraged or expected, and that actually are in contradiction with our values. And so at the very least they don't get any pat on the back for it, or that they actually get negative feedback on it. So an example, right, I've been talking about enjoy the journey, so I'll pick that as an example. Like someone who demonstrates them working at the weekend, working late, all those sorts of things, and are messaging and making it very visible that that's what they're doing, and not that they're doing it because they're loving a particular task. Because sometimes we all do that, where you kind of like, as you mentioned earlier, like I'm working on this project, I really want to do that, but that they're working on just business as usual, and maybe even showing that they're stressed or tired or whatever. And that at previous organisations, they might have even been encouraged or rewarded, right? They'd have been like, oh, well done. I can see that, Tim has really been breaking his back over the last week. He's working every weekend and, never takes a sick day, barely takes any holiday. Like, whoa, workhorse, amazing. Well done, Tim. Here's a raise, here's a promotion. And so, Tim in that situation comes to an organisation like ours with a different set of values, exhibits the same behaviours and gets no reward, and in fact in our organisation would get a message from team members and their manager saying you're right, like I'm a bit concerned this isn't enjoying the journey and that you're working outside of that. And in fact it would get picked up on a one-to-one, not only because we'd be worried about the employee, but because we know, for example, that if you send messages at evenings and weekends and so on, it's likely that it causes others to then have to work outside of normal working hours, which means that they're not enjoying the journey because they're then hopping on to deal with what they might perceive as an urgent query. And I think that typically we would then address that. And I myself have been a perpetrator of that in the past. Sometimes I've caught myself and immediately apologise. Sometimes I haven't, and it's been picked up for me by others. And as a result, I go, yeah, no, you're right, I did that and I'm sorry, and that's out of line with our value, and this is what I'll do in future. And I think when you have those, if you don't address it, like if you haven't got it set out, if you haven't said, this is what we expect and this is what we expect in terms of behaviours, it's then very difficult to deal with those behaviours, right? Because if as the manager, I just felt like, ooh, that's not great, how would I provide that feedback? Like it would just be a personal preference. And that could feel quite unfair. The employee might feel like, well, this is how I work.
So I think having those clearly stated makes a huge difference, and of course reduces the stress and so on. So let's take an example of how you know if you're using them well. Like, what does it look like when things are going well, and that you've got clearly defined values and that they're embedded in the organisation and so on?
I'd say the easiest way to know that you've got it right is when you've got it right, you will know you've got it right. If you are looking at your list of values and you're just going to go, yeah, I'm not sure if we're really using them, then trust me, at this point you're not.
Yeah.
When it's done really well, then you will see them not just kind of mentioned in the recruitment process, but being actively used as a way that you are assessing which candidates move forward to the next stage and which ones do not. It will be embedded into your performance process so that you are being rewarded for following that and being picked up again where not. It will be a case that if people go directly against those core values, that it does lead to feedback in one-to-ones. It does lead to people sharing that concern, not just ignoring it, however important that member of staff is. And ultimately, it would lead to the employee exiting if they were unable to address it. That's how important and fundamental it is, and when it's done well, it's just baked into every decision. Often, you start with those kind of performance processes, those ways of giving feedback when it's not working, and then through doing that, it bakes its way into everything else. The way you approach meetings, one-to-ones, meetups, every project. Enjoying the journey, it will affect our deadlines and everything else. It makes that much of a difference. So, if you're doing it well, you will know it. If not, then I do recommend sticking on for the next episode where we look at how to get core values defined that really do resonate for your team.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that. And of course, when it is done well, it makes management easier. What we've seen is that the team, to some extent, self-manage, because they will, like on our daily huddles, when people are sharing wins, they'll recognize each other in ways that link back to our values. The highlighting, like, oh yeah, it was really great to see this person take 3 weeks off, which is their longest holiday that they've ever taken, or it's really nice to see someone help, this person helping out someone else when they were sick, and that made it really easy, or thank you for helping me, or linking to something else like paying attention to detail, saying, oh yeah, this person did a really, really good job of making sure that they'd got everything I needed when I came to work on this task, which meant that I didn't get blocked and I was able to work more quickly. And essentially catching people doing right is something that we would encourage managers to do. Catch people doing things right against your values and highlight them. And what I love is when I can see team members doing that too. And on the flip side, providing those redirects when they see it not happening, when they see someone working late or whatever, and or not being focused on impact, like providing that challenge. And suddenly the company just works smoother, and you don't have the friction between them and all that kind of stuff. So I love that. So, in today's session, we've covered why having company values is so important, and the impact that it has both on managers, leaders, the business, but also on inter-team relationships and even individual relationships, and the stress and the power of having those. On our next episode, we're going to be sharing a simple approach for defining your values, because this is often an area that's tough. We'll also provide you with some specific tips on how to embed these in your organisation so they actually get used. So make sure that you stick around and subscribe and so on, so that you can join us for our next episode. Now, as regular listeners will know, we also run a weekly webinar on how to free up 15 hours per week and remove the constant stress of running a business without slowing down growth. It's typically every Wednesday at 1 p.m. UK time, and you can find out more and register for the next one at www.airmanual.co/webinar. And a final note for anyone listening on our podcast, on social media, we do need your help. If you found the content today valuable, please take a minute just to repost it, share it with other people, like it, subscribe, leave an honest review. This will help get the podcast to get more visibility and ultimately allow us to help more people, which is what we love to do. Otherwise, until next time, have fun.